I make aloha in the mother language of the people I come from, the Hawaiian people. I said to you, greetings among all of us, birds of many feathers. In that way of speaking, what we do is we recognize the reality of two things in the same moment. One, that we are all one kind, we're all human, and yet we are all very different from each other. The ability to hold two realities in a single moment is probably the genes of the Hawaiian culture, and I think of many cultures. Today is really a time for us to imagine that we're sitting at our kitchen table, and we've invited trusted people, famed for their intelligence and their wisdom, to come and talk with us as intelligent and wise people. In the ways, I think, of all the cultures that each of us come from, we normally start with a story, and so I got to start with one that I call a gift. And I have to say that I appreciate so much being here, because the first time I put gift and wealth together was at this place. So, I do a process called Building the Beloved Community, and in one of those processes, I ask people to tell 3 stories. First, you tell the story of all of your names. And when you tell that story, you begin to tell the story of your people, where you come from, what they thought was important for you to be called so that you could make your way in the world. The second is to tell the story of your community, however you experience what a community is. And that first story tells the story of who I am. The second story of community tells the story of who am we. And then the third story is to tell the story of your gift. So I did this process with a group of 11th and 12th graders in my high school in Hawaiian on Oahu. It's a very rural community, a native community. And we went around the circle of 12 teens, and we stopped with this young man. And he told the story of his names well and his community well. But when it came time to tell the story of his gift, he said, "What, miss? What kind of gift you think I get? I stay in this freaking special ed class. I hard time read, and I cannot do that math stuff. And why you make me shame for asking that question? If I had a gift, you think I'd be here." He just shut up and he shut down. And I felt shame because I didn't shut up. I shut up. So when the circle was called, I just packed up my stuff and left. But then you regret that, but there's nothing you can do about that. But 2 weeks later, I went into a store called Tamura's, and every community has that place where everybody passes through it at some point. So if you just wait long enough, whoever you want to see or don't want to see comes through. So I'm waiting, I'm going in the store and I have my cart and I'm going down the row and I see this boy. And his back is faced toward me and I think, run out of here. So I try to back up as fast as I can and not bang any of the sides so that I don't make any noise. So he turns around and he sees me and he throws his arms open like this. He says, "Auntie, I've been thinking about you, you know. I've been thinking, what my gift? What my gift? Auntie told me I can give her that fine. So I've been thinking, you know, Auntie. So I asked him, "So brother, what you give?" He said, "I cannot do that mad stuff and I get a hard time reading, but Auntie, when I go in the ocean, I can call the fish you. And the fish come every time. Every time I can put food on my family table. And sometimes when I stay in the water, a shark he come in and he look at me, you know. I look at him and I tell him, Uncle, I'm not going to take plenty fish. I'm going to take 1, 2 fish just for my family. All the rest I leave for you." So the shark tell me, "Hey, you cool, brother?" Cool. So the shark go his way, you know. I for my way. So that's my gift. And I tell him, "Brother, I hope for you. One day you're going to grow up, you're going to have a wife, you're going to have children, you're going to think, my wife get gift, the children get gift, but I finance." Then when I work with the teachers, and the principals, and the school superintendent, I tell the story of this boy. And I ask them, what would his life have been like if the school was gift-based? If the curriculum we taught to the gift of each of our children? And what of our society? What of our community? What if we were able to articulate the gifts of all of our community and could bring them all together into a gift-based economy? What would our communities look like? short ending to that story. So that boy, he started to tell me what he does. He says, I go fishing for the people who live around me. So they tell me I need 4 fish for this party, or they need 6 fish for that. And I said, so what do you do? He says, if the fish is in season and it's okay to get them, I say okay. But if not, I tell them, you can. I look at this boy, he's a genius. The system looks at this boy and he's rubbish. And I'm thinking, the basis of this boy's wealth is his gift. Our ability to help people find the true wealth that resides first in every person and then every person as a collective we is our gift. Our hope for this group of intelligent, wise people is for each of us to tell the story from wherever we sit, stand, live, to tell the story of how the policies we've been talking about really translate into practice. A lot of the things that people at this table do, I think, are as cultural translation. They begin to translate between cultures of communities of culture and help each other understand each other. Dr. Trina Shanks is a professor, certifiable, Rhodes Scholar. But that is one way of looking at Trina. There is another story that tells a story of why, of all the things she could be doing, why she's doing this. And so her story about leadership and the development of leadership, how and where it comes from, among other things, will be the story that she is helping us see. Luis? Is from the Mission Economic Development. What's the ACE? These are new friends to me, so I'm stumbling over their credentials, but I won't be after the panel is done. In fashion of the times, we struggle to communicate with each other over email and try to reform, but it wasn't until what Hawaiians call he'alo a he'alo, face-to-face, nose-to-nose, that true communication. But he has a story to tell about how all this work is being translated into the community that he belongs to and that is beloved to him in the mission. And Sima Puanani is from Chaya Community Development Corporation. I asked Sima, what does Chaya mean? And it's from under the shade of a tree. And I asked her why it was named that, and I hope she will tell you the story of the meaning of the organization. She is the executive director of this organization that works with South Asians, and whose story she will tell. The way that I'm anticipating this will go is that each of our panelists will have at least 8 minutes to tell their story in whole, so that you can see and recognize and appreciate the whole story, a little bit of it, that they have to tell without interruption. And then we will go to ask each other if there are questions that we have, and then we will open it to our brothers and sisters. And we will begin with Trina.
So the first chart looks something like this. It starts out with determinants of the Savings and Investment Action and Asset Accumulation. This is part of a chapter of a book that just was released by the Urban Institute Press. And it's really a description of an overall model to help identify some of the key determinants of assets in a theoretical frame, not for rich or poor, persons of color, not but kind of a general framework. And if this is a reasonable portrayal with at least some of the important antecedents to savings and asset accumulation, perhaps an interesting point for today's conversation is to kind of highlight the barriers that African Americans and other people of color might confront that lead to detours on these paths to building greater net worth. And given the conversation today, there's many things we could discuss, including historical inequities, and including all sorts of issues, but I'm just going to point out two before I move on. First, this bottom square right here, intergenerational and inter-household transfers. We know empirically that blacks and Hispanics are less likely to receive or expect inheritances, and even those that do have much smaller amounts in the overall population. So if that's the case, when non-Hispanic whites receive these from great-grandpa, uncle, whoever it might be, and they get help with the down payment on the house, and they get help when they're going to get married and not get into debt. And they start really quite early to start building assets and building their own net worth. But on the other hand, oftentimes African Americans and other people of color don't get those head starts and step ups. And so this whole square is either out of the picture or is very minimal. And then if you look at the second construct, which is institutional constructs, given current realities, obviously people are proposing things and things could change, but often these bundles of institutional features come through very specific moments. So through employer-based retirement savings plans, through maybe being introduced to things by your family if they've been involved with the larger economic system. And again, blacks and Hispanics are less likely to be covered under some of these employment pensions and to have access to some of these things. And we can have even an extended conversation about locations of financial institutions and the existence of the appropriateness of how outreach is done to low-income communities, predominantly populated by people of color. But what I want to say now is, again, for many low-income and African-American and people of color, this box also is kind of out of the picture. So we're really left with individual constructs. And so if we're limited to more individual characteristics, and we consider many of the things you talked about today, that African Americans and many people of color are less likely to earn the same level of income, more likely to become unemployed during economic downturns, often receiving less returns for the same level of educational attainment, more likely to have family and friends that are also struggling financially. It's really unrealistic to expect that any reduction in the racial gaps in net worth is going to come via individuals. And if you're going to achieve this during individuals, it requires extraordinary effort, ingenuity, and ability, not just for a few successful individuals, but practically every person of color would have to kind of push themselves forward. And that's kind of a merit story. But the reason that many of us focus on the institutional constructs and prioritize either universal or targeted asset building plans is that at least institutional change is probably the only leverage, or where we can get enough leverage to actually even start to reduce some of these gaps. So if certain populations are only left with individual constructs, they're missing all the other pieces of the puzzle that many other groups have. And so that's just a quick summary. You can read the chapter, look at all the pieces, but just to say that oftentimes the most disadvantaged are left with this individual construct where they have the least opportunity to leverage asset accumulation for themselves and their families. And the second model, the other page, is something that myself and Stephanie Body came, and kind of a working model for wealth creation activities. And again, if the goal is to reduce the overall racial gaps in net worth and asset accumulation, you need to really think about the whole wealth and income continuum. And I don't want to be misunderstood to think that we don't need to help low-income and working poor households to go from currently zero or negative net worth to having some money in the bank, because it can make a big difference for their personal well-being and their families and their communities. But if we're going to talk about reducing the overall wealth gap, we also have to think about the high end of the distribution, or at least the things that aren't happening even for middle and upper income families. As we talked about before, even those who would look like they'd be fine were steered into things like inappropriate mortgage packages. When the economy goes down, because they're the first generation to have started to build wealth, they lose that and they're wiped out and they have nothing to fall back on. And so we need to think about the whole continuum if we're looking at low communities of color. And the other piece to bring in, if you look at the bottom arrow, is to think about strategies that actually bring in representative institutions. So rather than depending on individuals doing things on their own, what sort of institutions have gained trust at the local community, whether it's churches and faith-based institutions, neighborhood resident and community-based organizations, civic organizations, sororities, fraternities, historically black colleges and universities. Is there a way to kind of bring some of these representative institutions to more broadly expand the conversation about how to build and create wealth? And so you'll see in the squares between, there's a whole host of different strategies. And I'm not going to even begin to say that this is the perfect grid and these are all the right strategies. And there's people in the audience and even here on the panel who can probably have much more extensive experiences about particular strategies and where they should go in terms of policy. And hopefully that can be part of the conversation that we have. But again, to think about across both continuums and not just be limited to one strategy or one end of income distribution or one type of institution. So that's kind of what these two charts are. That's some work that I've done in the past, and if it's helpful, please use it in the future. But I'd like to end my little time here about offering some specific examples from my own work to help illustrate some of these points in the larger diagram. Because although I work at the University of Michigan, I live in Detroit, and I've been invited as part of our School of Social Work Technical Assistance Center to partner with the local family foundation, the Skillman Foundation, to work in 6 Detroit neighborhoods. And the project is called Good Neighborhoods, and the foundation has committed millions of dollars over a 10-year period to community-based change in specific geographic areas that have high proportions of poor children and also primarily comprise people of color. So to quickly summarize, the foundation has mobilized residents and local nonprofit organizations to agree on a community goal, to work towards strategies to improve outcomes for not just a few children, but the majority of children live in these neighborhoods over a period of time. So the first stage focuses on planning, then building capacity, and then hopefully promoting major transformation. And I, right here, will just quickly summarize some of the desires that have been expressed by the residents and local nonprofits, as well as some of the work that's been considered, and not to prejudge, but just to say that right now they're thinking kind of small. And if there's some way that we can kind of take this national conversation on asset building and feed it into these people who are energized and want to do things in their communities but don't quite know how, don't quite have the tools, that could be another way to kind of jumpstart this conversation. So things that they're talking about is, we're desperate for jobs and we need to generate more income. They're struggling to deal with just basic hunger and material hardship that comes from high unemployment and weak economy. And so even though numerous appeals are made, voluntary giving isn't sufficient. They're concerned about their local schools and desires that children be better academically. And in the face of massive numbers of foreclosures, they can do small things, so they want to mow the overgrown grass in the lot next to their house and to keep newly abandoned properties from being run down. And they're also interested around ideas like land banks and mechanisms through which local residents can take responsibility and control of utilizing these vacant properties and homes for positive purposes. They're organizing in response to crime and safety issues with things like CB patrols, documenting and monitoring illegal dump sites, encouraging residents to report crimes they witness, and partnering with local police and law enforcement. When offered opportunities to give youth salaries for summer jobs, many local businesses and nonprofits in these communities provide mentoring and supervision without asking for any additional money for staff salaries or overhead costs, because they wanted to see the young people have some opportunities to have some money in their communities. They're eager to start and attract new businesses, and are even willing to go through training and take on personal risk, but they're concerned about the lack of financial capital and declining investment in their communities. And my major point here is that these types of community change initiatives that I've described in the first couple of years of what's going on in Detroit, they're becoming popular, they're doing good work, but they need to move beyond just civic engagement and programmatic ideas and success to incorporate some of the asset building and economic development models that we're aware of in this bill. And even after only a few years into the effort, I'm left with the question of how to best help these natural leaders who are engaged and want to move forward to build assets that can really actually benefit the entire community and not just individual households. And as one long-term resident and director of a local CDC complained, if we can come up with billions of dollars to rebuild Iraq, why does anyone bring money in these dynamic best practice models to fix my neighborhood? We can use some help too. And I get that stuff all the time. And so there's good ideas, but making the connection between what's being funded nationally and what's happening on the ground and how to get people to take the little efforts they're doing and make them bigger and grander and more useful over time is an important issue. And then for most of you in this room, you know that I do work with match savings accounts. And most of you are also familiar with individual development accounts, but I'm also part of the National Child Development Account Demonstration called SEED, which is Saving for Entrepreneurship, Education, and Down Payment, which is really going on in 12 community sites and is targeted towards savings for children. And actually there's a true experiment going on in the state of Oklahoma. And there's really a lot that we've really learned from research and individual development accounts, and much that we're in the process of learning from SEED. And I know many of you probably have opinions about things, and we can open up this conversation if people are interested. But what I really want to emphasize in the few minutes that I have left is that through empirical findings on account monitoring, we know that some immediately understand the opportunity and take advantage of incentives that are offered and make significant progress towards saving and eventually purchasing assets. In addition, there is some portion of the participants and potential enrollees who haven't been as successful in savings, and at least as they've been structured up to this point, even with fairly generous incentives. And just to provide one very concrete example, at the quasi-experimental site in Michigan for seed, 68% of Head Start families that were offered college 5-9 savings plans with an $800 match decided to enroll. And 32% said, no, thank you, we don't really want it right now, we don't want to enroll. And I've given an entire presentation that the decision to open a seed account isn't really associated with demographic, economic, or psychological characteristics. I've given a whole other presentation on, mostly based on qualitative research that really describes some of the reasons that people have given for not signing up, often based on mistrust and misunderstanding. Just to give one partial quote, I don't have the quote in front of me, but one woman said, when I saw this opportunity, I thought that's something for middle-income families. That's for people who have 2 parents and 2 incomes, not for people like me. And it was designed exactly for people like her, but she didn't really see it. And she really just threw it away. And even when people followed up, she thought, well, this isn't really for me. And so my major point here is there's good evidence in individual development accounts, similar matching programs, having a national child trust fund like they have in the UK is important and can help people in low-income families save and be a powerful motivator. But I'm left with the question is what can be done to better reach those that might be a little harder to engage, those whose families don't have a history of being banked, those that don't get the opportunity immediately, but with better outreach and better communication might be able to take advantage of the opportunity. And this is where, going back to where I started, finding local leaders and culturally situated institutions that are already trusted by potential participants, again, could prove to be an effective strategy. And another way is maybe taking some of the more successful savers in particular communities and intentionally initiating more peer-to-peer outreach and sharing so that they can take the strategies they use and kind of explain the relevance rather than some unknown outside staff person who may not be as familiar with the community or the people. And so, as was said at the lunch and throughout today, one of the most important things we can do is to document how and why disparities exist. So taking charts like this or whatever chart you think is important, so that rather than just relying on individual talent and merit, maybe we could figure out a way to highlight the gifts that exist either in individuals or in their communities. And also to better utilize these representative community-based organizations and bring them into the larger policy conversation. So I will stop there, and I will let the other panelists speak. But if you have any comments or thoughts about either of these models or any things I said, I look forward to the conversation.
My name is Granados, and I'm with the Mission Economic Development Agency in San Francisco. And if I seem especially dopey today, it's because I took a red eye, and so therefore I have the Diet Coke. This is my third one. But I want to talk to you guys. Maybe it's not the red eye that makes me dopey. So I want to talk to you guys about a project that we're doing within the Mission District. And so our organization is focused primarily in the Mission District in San Francisco, which is the Latino enclave in the city. So what we're doing right now is a one-stop asset development center that is focused on increasing the infrastructure and services for asset development and financial services, specifically focused on low-income Latinos. And a little bit about the Mission District. It's a 1 square mile neighborhood. There's 60,000 people. About 30,000 of those are Latinos. There's about 20,000 housing units within that square mile. 82% of residents are tenants. There's 2,500 small businesses. We have about 50 nonprofits within the neighborhood. And again, all of that is happening within 1 square mile. And our recent history, what we've seen is that there's been a wholesale displacement of businesses, organizations, and small and nonprofits. We've also seen a very strong increase in real estate values, and so market rate housing is the highest and best use. It's not affordable housing. It's not community centers. It's not places for small business development. It is market rate housing. And the kind of market rate housing that we've seen happen within the neighborhood in the last 10 years is primarily studios. And for the two bedrooms that we've seen, they are going at about $750,000 per unit. So again, there's a lot of stuff happening, but then you think of who are these assets for? So in some of our other work that we've done in the neighborhood, we found that folks, low-income Latinos in the neighborhood, those who speak Spanish specifically, have a very strong distrust of financial institutions. We have on the Mission Corridor, which is between 16th and 24th Street, we have the highest concentration of check cashing and pay to lending places anywhere in California. We also have about 7 main financial institutions that have branches within the neighborhood. So there's a very strong financial service and asset development industry within the neighborhood. But the question is, like, are these services relevant and accessible, and are they punitive? And I think all those things are true. And I think when we talk about the racial gap, there's a very strong set of services that a strong need that is not being met. That is absolutely not being met. While there's a lot of activity within the neighborhood. A few other things that we think are true for the neighborhood. IDAs, I think we have a couple of really good programs in San Francisco that work on IDAs. A few years back, we did an analysis about, and out of, I think, 1,200 IDAs, about 57 of those came to the neighborhood. We have, I think, a fairly limited and not very strong asset development infrastructure within the neighborhood. Most of the neighborhood groups are tenants. We did a survey a year and a half ago, and I think out of 30-some groups that responded to our survey, only 4 owned their properties, and most of those who rented were on a month-to-month basis. But then again, when it comes to the opportunities, we have 2,500 small businesses within the neighborhood. So I think that is an avenue that people have found. I'll just tell you a little bit more about what the project that we're trying to do is. Again, it's a one-stop financial and asset development center serving San Francisco low-income Latinos. It'll house multiple organizations. And the intent is to increase the continuum of services, of financial and asset development services. It'll be co-owned by the different organizations over time. And then I think the most important part of it is that we're trying to figure out how to create an integrated service delivery model where the organizations are not only going to be co-located next to each other and we'll be able to have informal conversations, but as part of their lease, they'll have to work together on figuring out how to coordinate services. And I'm really excited about that, but we're just starting that work, and we don't know how that's going to work. So I'll be happy to be here 3 or 5 years from now to tell you how that's worked out. Again, I'm going quickly because I want to share some of the things that we're thinking about. Again, in terms of the service integration, we're starting with the co-location, basically having the organizations being next to each other, then thinking about can we share equipment, can we share copiers, technology, et cetera, Then the next level is sharing staff. Can we share reception, accounting, fundraising staff? Are those some of the things that we can do together? And then again, the coordinated service delivery is really about doing a common intake, doing client tracking, so that I know that if they come to Meta, that 6 months ago they went to another organization, and then I know where they're going to go next. So we are able to track clients throughout the system. And I think, and then evaluation, like figuring out, like not how many workshops we did, but for this family, well, how much added value do we have? Did they increase their credit by this much? Did they increase their savings? Did they reduce their debt? What are their investment opportunities? That's really where we want to get to. I think like some of the things that are exciting for me about this project is about having a focus on asset development within this neighborhood. It's not about social service. It is about social service, but it isn't about social service. It's about asset development and having it. It'll be at 19th and Mission, which is the main corridor in the neighborhood, and so I think it'll be a center for. Well, people think about more social services, but it will be specifically be focused on asset development. One of the things that I think is going to happen, and I already started to see it, is with the partners that are coming in, they're trying to figure out how do they engage in financial services, how do they engage in asset development, when their main set of work has been family support. And so we are liking that connection between family support and asset development, and figuring out how do we entice organizations to think more about financial services and asset development. Yeah. I think in terms of the groups that are part of it, I think it'll provide them a secure place for them to be, so that they know they won't be kicked out in 2 years or 3 years, so that if things go well, that they can be there for the long term. I think it definitely allows for enhanced communication between the different groups, just about how, it could be around asset development, financial services, but it could be more organizational development issues that they have to deal with. I mean, I find it that with our organization, I think we talk to a lot of organizations, but I feel like the more focused I am on my work, the more isolated I become. And in some ways, it feels good to be isolated because I'm so focused. So I think what we're trying to do is get away from that model. And then also it provides an investment to this nonprofits so that they will know that by being in the building, they will themselves have assets. They will become co-owners of this facility. And so we've worked very directly with that Insight Center in making sure that happens. And so I think, again, the end result is we're going to have this asset development and financial service that are being provided by organizations that are trusted by the constituency. I mean, that's something that is not happening right now. We will have these services that are meant to directly compete with predatory entities such as check cashing and payday lending. So there'll be direct competition between us and them. It'll be targeted to Spanish speakers in a culturally and linguistically appropriate manner. I mean, like we're not apologizing for that. This is who we are. And then very intently, like figuring out what are those services that these low-income Latinos need. And so we're targeting that and trying to figure out what that is and how we provide it. And then, again, I keep on talking about the service integration, and it's the part that I understand the least about right now, but I think that is the part that over time will be the main component of the project. And I'm running out of time. So a few things that we think, I mean, as we sit in this building, in thinking about what's some like national policy that could help our experience in the Mission District. And I think often when I come to these kinds of events, I find that there's a gap between the local practices and the federal policy or even state policy. But I think there are some basic things that should happen. I think there ought to be many more resources for providing services and providing investment opportunities for these kinds of populations. I think there ought to be ways to encourage these mainstream financial institutions to really invest in these communities in a respectful way, because their products and services are often not relevant, and I feel like often to create the services, I think we're begging them to please help us do this stuff. And I think there's a way of working together, but that's not happening. And I think the third thing in terms of legislation, I think we have to go after those predatory practices and legislate them away. I think I was in this building last week, and I heard that there's a bill being introduced right now by a Latino congressperson from Chicago, who is submitting a bill to give more flexibility to the check cashers and payday lenders. And I'm thinking that is exactly the opposite that we need to be doing. So with that, thank you very much. I have information on our project if anybody wants.
Last speaker before the fire. Well, I'll keep my comments brief. So thank you, Insight, for having me here today. I wasn't really prepared to talk about our work in the framework of asset building. We don't really approach it in that way, but when I started to think about what we're doing, it started to fall in place. But Chaya CDC, just to give you some background on our organization, we're based in Queens, in Jackson Heights. The organization primarily works with South Asian immigrants, so those from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, as well as the diaspora from the Caribbean, and more so Africa. It's one of the fastest growing immigrant groups in New York City, and is very diverse, as you can imagine. Jackson Heights itself, there are more languages spoken in Jackson Heights than any other in the country. We always like to tell people that. And also where Scrabble was invented. Language is very big. But the South Asian population is 270,000 as of the 2000 census. So it's one of the largest Asian American groups as well. And contrary to public perception, is not uniformly affluent. In New York City particularly, most of the South Asian community came after 1985, so it's a lot of newer immigrants. And many live in poverty. About 30% of Bangladeshis and Pakistanis live in poverty in New York City, and 40% have limited English proficiency. So that gives you a sense that we do have the Wall Street affluent South Asian community, but we also have those that are really struggling to survive. And many of them work in the service industry. They're drivers, they work in restaurants. We also have a lot of construction workers. And so our community has very much been impacted by the economic crisis. And Chaya's, we started a happy homeownership program a few years ago. And we started researching, we did a community-based survey to see what the needs were. And we found at that time, in about 2002, that predatory lending was in fact very prominent. And today we're seeing the result of that in some of the zip codes of New York City, Jackson Heights included. We found that 50% of those who filed or who were in default were South Asian. And we did this by actually looking at names because there is no disaggregated data. So we just basically looked at who had filed or who was more than 30 days behind and documented it that way. Because we do get frustrated. We're always reading research and reports, and they always say that African American and Latinos have been severely impacted by this crisis, and Asian Americans are always left out. So we're always the ones bitching in the corner. Don't forget us. So it is complex, and it is concentrated in certain communities, but our community is very much big. That being said, there are some opportunities with all that's going on, and I think that Chaya is really trying to look at our neighborhood in a comprehensive way. Jackson Heights is a mix of rental units, co-ops, condos, and large-scale or single and multi-family homes. And so the types of living conditions that people live in, many people live in overcrowded conditions. That's one of the most dire situations that we're seeing in Queens because of the lack of affordable housing and because a lot of the newcomers are moving into Queens. The community we work with, we're dealing with multiple languages. So we have Urdu, Bengali, Nepali, Tibetan. Tibetan and Nepali are the newest immigrants coming into Queens, and we just hired a Nepali staff person, so we're able to do that work as well. But so part of our mission is really to bring together these different groups. Obviously, back home, Pakistan and India and Bangladesh have their differences, Sri Lanka. And so part of our goal is within the context of Queens, within the context of New York City, how do we come together and build community? Our businesses are next to each other, the children go to school together. So that in itself is an accomplishment. That being said, we're also living in some of the most diverse communities in the country, and so working with other minority communities is also part of what our mission is. So asset building, there are a lot of different areas we work in, but it's all primarily focused around housing. Let's see here. Well, I was trying to think of what some issues that were culturally unique to our community and how that leads into our work. Well, the homeownership education. One of the reasons we got into it is because You know, the South Asian community, one of the assets, I guess, is that this community does have a tendency towards savings. Even if they're very low income levels, most people, I shouldn't say most, many, try to have some savings. And so programs like IDU programs, there's a lot of potential there when working with these communities. There's a lot of informal savings programs that happen, like kitties. So family, like 10 to 15 families will pool resources, and each month somebody take the whole $1,200, $100 every month. So there's an opportunity for some matching savings programs there. Reverse mortgages just will not work with the South Asian community concept. It's so counterintuitive to why somebody would own a home, to take equity out of it. And so those kinds of programs don't work well, even though it could really help some of the seniors who could use the cash flow. We can't convince them out. So, also, a lot of times multiple members of the family are contributing to a mortgage, and not everyone is actually on the mortgage. So currently, what we're dealing with the foreclosure issues that's coming up over and over again. How do we help families that actually have access to the income refinance into a mortgage that they can afford, that they can actually include household income in that calculation. The other thing is that a lot of people have multi-generations in their homes. So in a single-family home, they'll have the grandparents, grandchildren, often even more than one sibling in their family sharing a home. And so often what happens, one of the issues that CHI is dealing with is we're getting a lot of owners who are being fined for renting their basement units without going through proper procedures of legalizing these units. So one of the things that we're trying to do is provide technical assistance to owners as to how to go through that process and bring the units up to grade. But they feel they're being illegally or unjustly targeted for these fines, which can be up to $15,000. And so by the time they get done paying the fees, they could have used that money to renovate the home properly. So this is our advocacy campaign that we're really working on right now, is to push the city to look at these units. There's 100,000 estimated across the city, potentially up to 300,000. And we feel like these units could, if they were brought up to code, could be safe units of affordable housing that New York City needs so desperately. And also for the tenants themselves, right now they're coming to us, they don't have any rights. And so when they go to housing court, eventually they have to be evicted because the units that they're in are not recognized by the courts. So we feel that the city could benefit by increased tax revenues, the owners could benefit by being able to count that income, and tenants get more safety. So this is one of the main issues that we're really trying to look at in our community and ask people to work with us on. And I don't know if that even applies on a federal level, but I feel like, I know in other cities, there are accessory dwelling unit codes in other cities. Maybe there's potential for some kind of tax incentive created around that. Also, the shared ownership model is something that could be very useful, I imagine, in other communities as well. So that's all. Thank you.
There were several of you who mentioned so directly the issue of trust and the fact that there is little trust between people who make the policy and people who have to live the policy. So I'm wondering on two levels. How do you reestablish trust? How do you create a system in which there are people recognized in the community who can vouch for the different aspects of the work? And how do you deal with the definition of what is wealth? In your various communities, that definition, we are imposing a definition of wealth on others. Owning a house, saving, education. That is the definition of this community that we are imposing for others to be part of. So I wonder, in the communities that we are part of, what is that definition? How do we help people become engaged in the work that we've been talking about? I don't know if that's a fair question, but it's a real question.
Well, we did a number of, for various projects, we've done focus groups with community folks, and they're all these conversations are held in Spanish, and a lot of the information that we don't tell them how do they define wealth. We ask them about that. How do they define it? But one of the things that came up for us that we're like surprised about is that when it comes to wealth and business development opportunities, they were not talking about creating small business on their own, but they were actually talking about co-ops. And that's something that was surprising to us. So they helped define what that is. So I think to me, it's about engaging in that conversation and asking questions and allowing people to define what it means for them.
Just one comment that I would have on this point. One of the things that's happening in the Detroit Good Neighborhoods Initiative is that they had a limited kind of small pilot to offer like 50 young people in each community the summer jobs. The one that I told you about that they got very limited overhead and things for it. But this this summer, partly because some of the stimulus dollars, but also partly because there's been a big push to get co-investors, they're going to offer at least 5,000, maybe 10,000 young people jobs for the summer, and that could lead to year-round employment depending on who does the sponsorship. And so one of the things that I was really excited about is that since they had a year to kind of gear up, build relationships in the community, some people have waiting list already for youth employment for the summer, is this would be a great time to introduce the idea of some sort of youth savings account. So rather than having them spend all their money on tennis shoes or movies or whatever they're spending it on, and since they've worked out some of the glitches already about how do you inform the community about the jobs, how do you vet the young people, how do you kind of build the program right, now is really a great time to start engaging some of those conversations about me coming in with an account. So it's not like I'm starting up here saying this is the way we want to set it up, but there's a lot of people who've already kind of done a lot of the work on the ground, and so I can take the stuff that I've maybe learned through a lot of the work we've done around seed and some of the asset building models and some of the work they've done with young people and figure out how to make it work. And just to give one specific example, I wouldn't have thought of this, but a lot of the young people, their parents aren't working, and they're the only ones, even in these summer employment, earning income. And you could say it's a failure if they don't save, 50% of their income or something like we would expect maybe some young people do. But if they're able to contribute to their family and keep their family from being kicked out of their home or being evicted or something like that, that's a big contribution, and we shouldn't negate that. So thinking about different ways of describing the program, but also measuring it, and also different ways of talking about impact. So yes, offer the accounts, yes, offer match, but also recognizing that a lot of these families and young people are in very different situations. And knowing that coming in, the way that I would maybe gauge success might be a little differently than I might have thought about before. So I'm still going to offer it in maybe similar ways, but also having some side contingencies because all these different families are in very different situations and helping them co-create some of the things that we do around accounts. Just one example.
I would say in terms of building trust, the most important thing is having a consistent presence and being there and being committed to it. I think a lot of organizations come in and out of communities, and that's not going to be successful. It's also an argument for multi-year funding, right? Because you need to be able to stay and be there for a long time to get to that point.
I'd like to turn to our brothers and sisters here and to see if you have any comments or questions. And when the microphone comes to you, could you please tell us your names so that if people want to speak to you afterwards or find you, they'll know your name and they can find you. So none of us are anonymous here. Any questions?
I'm George Harris. I'm in San Diego, and I want to know I think each of the panelists touched on shared ownership and community wealth building strategies. I was involved in a project in San Diego that was really focused on community wealth building called Market Creek Plaza, and I was wondering how, in your communities, with your experiences, how has that come up, and is it being implemented, and do you see a future for those kind of strategies?
Sure. So Market Creek Plaza, great project. I guess it is the project to talk about, right? So I really appreciate the work that you guys have done. With ours, it's a different context. It's not different issues, different land use issues, where you guys had a lot of land. We have limited land. And I think, and we have chosen, in terms of our co-own model with this particular project, it's not based on the residents necessarily, but it's based on the community groups. So that's part of the answer. So.
Well, the one thing that we're doing in Detroit is trying to get them to think about ways of doing more co-ownership. So we actually would love to get more to where you are. And actually, Market Creek Plaza is listed up as an example. But a few of the examples that happen is they're coming together to try to mobilize to bring a grocery store and have it be co-owned or have some sort of co-ownership structure as opposed to just some outside investors. They also have gotten a small group of local organizations to build and create a Dairy Queen. So there's small successes, but because there is a lot of vacant land and a lot of potential, one of the things that we're having difficulty with is getting people to come to some agreements on what they want to do and why. And so if anyone here has suggestions of how to make that happen, or just kind of the long process of having meetings and having talking, and maybe eventually something will come from it. But what I would hope is that if there are ways or strategies to kind of get to some of those co-ownership alternatives more quickly, that would actually be very helpful. So I think it would be a good starting point. Because from what I understand, it's not just co-ownership, but it's also open space, where people can come and meet and have community productions. It's a shared space in many ways for expression as well as ownership. And so, but I think, at least in our work, it's taking a really long time to get people to come to agreement. And then when they have agreement, it's things that there's not a lot of funding for. So once they have some agreement, thinking about ways to either get some matching or to build capital, so they're not just waiting for someone from the outside to kind of say, bless the idea, do it for you. So we don't have the answers yet, but what you're talking about, I think, would be a really good way for the communities to go. So how can we get there more quickly? And if you have ideas about that, I'm sure the whole room would love to hear.
So let me just give you some specifics on our co-ownership model. So we, instead of being Meta buying the building, we form a limited liability corporation. Currently, Meta is the only member of the corporation. We're guaranteeing the financing. The tenants in the building will, the partners in the building will initially be tenants. At year 7, Meta will make 49% of the equity accessible to the partners. And then to qualify as co-owners, one of the things that they have to do is they have to participate in service integration. So it's set out already, but that's the structure.
I'd like to give a little comment and then we'll go. Where I come from a rural community, and the way that we began to talk about ownership is a very uncomfortable concept. And in Hawaiian tradition, owning anything was not what you did. You had felt co-responsibility for something. And as we began to spell out the ability to co-be responsible for something, people were willing more and more to buy into the process. Our process was around aquaculture and utilizing people's backyards and helping them grow food fish. And we create actually family-based economic development, which turned into community-based economic and So the co-ownership began by helping children understand the relationship between my work. Thank you for that question.
Hi, my name is Sunina Chaudhry, and I'm with EARN in California. And this question is for Seema. First of all, as a Nepalese American, I'm very excited to hear that you have someone who speaks Nepalese. I think speaking of communities that are underrepresented, I think even within the South Asian community, that's a group that is, there's very little information about, and there are very few services targeted to that community. With that said, I'm aware of, from personal experience, two communities who are primarily refugees and are here as a result of political asylum. Do you have any experience with that community? And based on yours, if you do, what are their needs in terms of asset building? It's a very broad question, I realize, but I think any information would be really useful for this.
Well, my experience with the refugee community is actually not with China. I worked with another agency and became familiar with the Office of Refugee Resettlement that's based here in DC. And the way it works is that this federal agency works with state-level offices to basically fund community-based organizations to work with refugee populations. And I have a whole slew of criticisms of how this program works, but essentially the idea is that organizations are funded for a temporary period for about 3 to 4 years to help refugees get resettled. In terms of asset building needs of refugees, I think the tradition of how refugees are assisted in the U.S. and brought to places that have no understanding of their background and who they are. There's so many needs. I think you're starting from ground zero, right, when you're dealing with, sorry for the use of that term, but you're starting with pretty much zero assets, zero savings in a new country, and that is similar to what a lot of immigrants face. But I think step one is, the basics. You have to, before you can start earning assets, you have to start earning income, and then go from there. But I think that, these types of cooperative models are a way to, there could be some creative ways of looking at it, ways to help those people. But yeah, sorry if that went around, but it's difficult. But
thank you.
Lisa Hasegawa from National Capacity was speaking this morning, but one of the things that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, or trying to think about here, is the big solution, right? What I think we tried to touch on it a little bit this morning and in the discussion. So I asked the three of you, what would be the elements or the, criteria of funding that would be best suited to what you all are doing right now? Because I think I talked a little bit this morning about the innovation that is happening at the local level, but for some reason it's been really difficult to kind of bubble that up into a federal funding program. So I've heard things like multi-year funding. I've heard cooperative structures, like how do we incentivize these new federal programs if there are to be any. But I think it's because we haven't had those big ideas, if you will, and sort of all the details worked out, that therefore that some of the funding, et cetera, is being invested elsewhere. And so I think I'd love to hear any creative ideas in that regard. Like, is it block grants, for example? Is that better? Is it some of these policy changes? Is it core operating support, like the funding after the Juan Party that went to see community health centers and CDCs? Like, what might that be? Multi-year, yes.
This is not an answer in any way. If you were to ask me the ideal based on the work that I've done thus far, I think a universal model of some sort of account that happens for everyone, let's say a child-based account like the UK has, so a child trust fund for every child, But then once that's in place, once that universal infrastructure is in place, to not just hope that people participate equally and that somehow will reduce the wealth gap, right? But saying, well, now that we have something, regardless of parental ability, parental income, parental investment, there's at least some seed that each child has. But then, starting from that, using it to help children negotiate their way through the public school system by knowing their gifts and recognizing they have a future. And even if the teachers aren't doing what they're supposed to do, they can use that money in conjunction with other people to do things in their communities for themselves. Working through the local community organizations, once they know that some of these things exist, to tap into other sources of funding to either pool resources at the local level or to do kind of infrastructure investment at the local level so that there are better use of green space or things going on so the children have space. And so, I mean, so kind of starting with something that's universal and then finding ways to translate it to make sense at different communities and having some additional kind of pots of money that go to the community side as you're helping each of these individual children and families make forward in the future. I know that's kind of generic, but that's one way I think about it. So if we have some sort of a universal infrastructure in place, then we could find ways to tie it into things that are going on at the local level. I don't know if that was what you wanted, but that's
that's great. Because that's one source, and I'd love if Luis and Seema, if you guys could talk about, what about the concept of community wealth institutions, for example? I mean, I've heard that batted around, but is that a reality? Is that something that people would resonate with folks? To be sort of the receiver of the universal program.
Yeah. So I'm not, again, I don't feel capable of answering the question. It's such a big question but I think for me, I feel like I come to realize that in San Francisco, like in the Mission District, in San Francisco, in California, the asset development infrastructure is not there for the people that we're targeting. Mm-hmm. So then, like, if that's the basic premise, what do you have to do to like put resources towards that so that it benefits people directly, so that it benefits these institutions, so that it restricts the predatory lending and provides incentive to the mainstream financial institutions to actually deal with our people. I mean, I don't know how to think about it. I think there's other people in this room who have thought much more carefully about it. But I just kind of think that, I feel like in a lot of ways, whether it's at the neighborhood level or at the federal level, I feel like we're playing at the margins.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thinking about the last few months and how inundated, not just Chaya, but across New York City, organizations are losing funding, and the level of service, the level of demand has gone up, at least quadruple in our case. And so how do you move it to scale while also leaving time for the important work? The legal services organizations, the legal advocacy organizations in New York City do not have the time to do what we need them to be doing right now, which is more in line with what their mission is. Instead, they're handling case by case, and not even enough cases, in my opinion, So I think it needs to be brought to scale. It needs to be consistent. But some of it does need to be done by the city itself. I wouldn't want a small organization like Chaya to take on everything. I think that we would lose sight of our mission as well. I don't want us to just become a service organization. So capacity building and funds for advocacy as well.
We want to, in addition to the work that we've been doing at the federal level in terms of just putting ourselves together and talking about the policy sort of changes that are being made nationally and the education that we've been doing for policymakers and for each other around this wealth gap. We want to also start doing work at the community and state level and constituency building and coalition building. And so my question is, how should we ask about that? How do we engage community? One, through the education around this wealth gap is, and empowering the community to know that they can do something about this, have voice, that just as we're building our own voices to have administrations with members of Congress, do that on the community and state level so that people are needed, that their voices are needed, that their ideas and thoughts and energy is needed?
If I could start. I think that's a great question, because I think often we get caught up in this like direct service mode, so we have to provide the most services to the most people. And like with our organization, we've, like I just shared with you, like in 10 years we've gone from serving 70 people, which I can't believe we did that, to serving 1,200 people per year. And so we've become that direct service organization. And I'd like we just approved a new strategic plan, and part of it is making it intentional that we're putting, in addition to direct service, one of our core strategies is evaluation, so like really focusing on the outcomes, and it's organizing, and it's policy development. Often when we go to City Hall in San Francisco, I feel like we're like the only Latinos or the only people of color in that City Hall. And I'm thinking with the 1,200 people that we provide services to, can we bring in 200 of those folks, and what impact will we have there? And I'm thinking part of it is having the intent to do it. And I think in the figuring out the how, I think is a good question to ask. When I talk to our direct service folks, and I think like the connection between the people who do wealth creation, like our homeownership counselors or our business development people, they want to focus on their direct services. They ask me, so am I going to have to be doing organizing? And I like the answer is yes, but I'm not sure exactly what that means. And they're getting stressed out about it. So I think answering that connection between like how do you connect wealth creation folks and the organizing, I think is really, really, really key. Because I think we do that a lot around the social services, and we do that for education, we do that for other kinds of things. In the mission, we've actually managed to do that around land use planning, which is actually, I think in some ways, a more abstract concept than wealth creation. So we're actually engaging in a path of figuring out how do we do that, and how does it lead to local policy? How does it, like the San Francisco's thinking, I mean, I think most of you guys know Jose Cisneros, the treasurer. He's done the Bank on San Francisco, which I think is a nice program. And he's thinking about introducing some local legislation around child bank accounts. And we want to figure out how do we help that. I mean, it seems like that makes sense to us. So I think having the intent is the first thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the discussions that we've been having here apply, it fits so well with a lot of the work that organizations are already doing on the ground. You know, I was fortunate enough to attend some of these meetings, and I have used what I've learned here when I talk to the media, when I talk to the community about why we're doing what we're doing. And so I think it's easily integrated. It's an issue of engaging with the organizers and the leadership, and then you know, integrating the language. And really, it's a framework for work that's already being done. It's just a different way of looking at it, and it is helpful because it does help. It has helped me connect the work that I'm doing every day to something broader, and it gave me a way of explaining.
I think there is an important role that there are certain people in a community play, and that's the cultural translator role. And often, you know, that it doesn't have a title and there's no job description attached to it. It really is like the term ante, something that someone does. And in my case, if there are legislators who have a particularly sticky problem that they want to discuss within my community, they'll come to me and they'll say, can you put together a group of people that you think not only will be interested in this, but can do something about it? So my job, and I don't know, my work, not my job, is to make that happen and create an environment in which people can have a conversation, a trusted one, with each other. And so some of that is figuring out the kinds of processes that will allow people to speak, what we call the people, their belly button, to have conversations from below the belly button. And because oftentimes these conversations in these formal settings happen up here. And when you can bring them down to below the people, That's where you bring your heart and your intuition and your experience. And that kind of conversation, if you want to really connect deeply, in deep cultural ways to community, it requires the following. Food. And food not served that way. It requires food, it requires time. It requires a kind of time, patient time. And I don't mean that it goes on forever, because time really goes only one way. But the way we use time has to be respectful, which is why often I use the time even when I'm working with elders, because each of us has only the same amount of time. So when we're having a group meeting, rather than let one person go on forever, each person has 4 minutes. And I will pass the watch to them when they have 1 more minute left in their 4, so that we can cover everyone in the room. And everyone's voice, whether they really have something to say about the issue or not, needs to be heard in the room. Because unless they are, you don't know that they're missing. And so setting up the process right at the beginning in which that respectful speaking happens, irrespective of your age and your education. So I'm thinking and talking about how we connect culturally to people who are the policymakers for their family, their neighborhoods, their larger community. And that, the audience that Alan Jenkins had us create those messages for, there is an audience. It's called my neighbor, or the woman that works in the store, but we didn't create that message for. That we need to pay attention to how we language those messages. And I think that may be a fundamental way that we really connect up with people. That part of our discussion needs to be about figuring that out.
Since I'm an elder, I won't take more than 4 minutes. I'm Dennis Galpin, I'm from San Antonio. And just one bit of information and a question. The Access for Independence Act grant is a 5-year program. So if you're looking for multiple year funding, that's an opportunity for individual development accounts. So, the other part is that we have looked at, we're using some of our neighborhood stabilization program money. And we're a large city, so we got some directly, but also the rural cities, you can get some from your state. So the state received an allocation as well as the large cities. So we're using some of that for also individual development accounts. And but it's only for home ownership, to buy up foreclosed homes and people in the city. So I was wondering if anybody's using neighborhood stabilization dollars. And the second thing is we're in the process of putting together we have to amend our plan for the homeless prevention services grant that's just come through. And again, it's part of the stimulus package. Everyone receives some. The big cities receive it directly. The smaller ones get it through the state. But you can only use it. You can use it for a variety of reasons. One is to do rental assistance. And one of the things we're contemplating is paying so much rent for people and then having them pay like 30 or 40% of the rent, and then turn that into an IVA or a savings account for them. So when we stop paying for the rent, they have some money in the bank account to pay for the rent on an ongoing basis. So I was just wondering if anybody was looking at some of the stimulus efforts as a way to turn those around and use them. All of their, not the initial intent, but one of the things you can look at using them for is for the neighborhood stabilization program is to buy home. The housing, the homeless services prevention would be is to help people build savings from the rent they're not paying because you're providing them rental assistance. I was just wondering if any of y'all were looking at that or contemplating this kind of things.
In New York, those dollars, it's going to be a big battle. I'm trying
small organization.
The neighborhood folks have been asked to respond in 1 2-hour period to how the city's going to use neighborhood stabilization funds. I don't know if their ideas are going to be listened to any more than anybody else, but money is coming to Detroit. How it's going to be used is hard to say. But those are great ideas.
Many of their city will help you out with New York.
So my question is a bit more simple. Most of you had spoken about large discrepancies, particularly racial discrepancies, and the different ways in which you exist. You have a broad range of constituencies, from funders to policymakers to everyday folks that are experiencing the disparities themselves. We have been having a larger conversation about what is the most effective way.
Excuse me, who are you?
Oh, hi, my name's Moderator. I'm with United for a Fair Economy. And so my question is, how are the constituencies in which you're engaging dealing with the discrepancy? So dealing with the fact that the current census data doesn't really bring APIA economic realities to fruition, the fact that Latinos are struggling both from the large diaspora and the inability of current data to really deal with that, the fact that indigenous people's issues and economic things are not often brought to the forefront when we're talking about these different issues, that blacks in Detroit are dealing with several issues, from the urban sprawl to the racialization of that particular urban sprawl and the complete vacation, I wish it was vacation, the vacating of the urban centers and all the industries following them. How does that inspire your constituencies once they know that they are the product of systemic issues? Does this turn off the local legislators and what you're dealing with? How much do you tell the narrative of the people that you are trying to inspire and get organized? Or do you not? How do you, I just would be really curious to know, in the 3 separate cases, how do you describe and talk about discrepancies and what that has meant for your populations?
You said it was a simple question.
I don't know. I mean, the reality is, like, if, our people know what they're experiencing, so we don't have to tell them that. So I think it's more about listening to them and capturing that experience. I think when it comes to our legislators, I think they know as well. It's pretty visible. So I think it's being able to capture some of the stories that we know are happening. I think going back to the data is really important. But the problem with the data is that it's all demographic data, but there's no asset development data at the local level. So how do we do that? And so that's going back to the evaluation component, so that we can build our own set of data based on our constituents, and so try to engage. And I feel like people are giving us the benefit of the doubt because they're our friends. And I think one of the things that we try to do is like connect people to each other. So if there's some people who can hear us as the financial institutions, we connect them to some community people, we connect them to some more progressive funders that actually they might be a better audience than here. That might be a better communicator than us, because talking from a foundation to a bank is that they might see each other. They might not seem as threatening, but I think the message could be the same. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry.
Well, one thing I did do is I put on an economic forum, so I brought economists who could talk about the larger economy and what the macro economy and what they think might be happening in Detroit for the next 5 to 10 years, at least their predictions. We brought some local bankers to talk about what sort of things they fund and they don't. And so we had a really dynamic conversation. And I guess maybe I was thinking too idealistically, so I hoped we'd have that conversation and they'd come back and say, this is what we want. But what it was, I think it started a conversation, and over time, they're having more and more ideas. And when they have ideas, they come to me or they come to people who I brought to the forum. And so I think it started percolating ideas, but it wasn't as quick as maybe I had anticipated. But because this is a 5 to 10 year process, as soon as the funding continues, you can see that the conversations they had the first year were very basic. And now 3 and 4 years, they're coming together on small projects, and maybe in another couple of years, they might have ways to challenge their legislatures and to say, now that I understand the structure, this is what we want. So I'm hoping the process will get us there, but it didn't happen quite just by giving, you know, a great set of ideas and then, you know, all the answers come, of course. But I think that starting the conversation has been fruitful, and hopefully will continue to bear fruit over time.
Well, I mean, I would just say that in our community, everyone's, many people are very aware of their own sort of marginalized position, right? I mean, because it's very visible, you know, nothing's translated into South Asian languages. There are very few elected officials who are South Asian, and so people are very aware of it, and they've been going to other nonprofits with no South Asian faces until the last ever since 9/11, there's been more, but you know, before that, so I think that people are very aware of it. I don't know if it's motivating though. It, you know, depends how deeply cynical someone has become. You know, sometimes it can be, those can be the best challenges, and those can become your best organizers. But others, you know, they want to see change and tired of fighting. It also has to do with corruption back home. You know, if you come from a country where you can't really trust the government, it becomes harder here. Others that have seen successful struggles.
Just wanted to mention two tools that we have available, but it would be great to hear if any of the panelists have insights about how best to use them. One is our organization, the Opportunity Agenda at Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and some others convinced the Obama administration to state explicitly in its instructions from the Office of Management and Budget to all the federal agencies that all federal money regarding the stimulus has to be used consistently with civil rights laws. And the civil rights laws that apply, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, and others, have not only outlawed intentionally discriminatory actions, but policies and practices having a discriminatory impact, which means if New York State tries to spend all of its money in communities, let's say building hospitals not in communities of color, as it has been the pattern so far, it's actually illegal, in addition to being the wrong thing to do. And the same is true in Detroit and many of these other places. And I think, you know, the next step is for us to really start to use that and hold them accountable, and also to push the administration to see if they meant it, right? That's what they said, but it's up to them to enforce it. It's up to us to bring it to their attention. And then quickly, the other tool I wanted to mention is we're about to release a report, The State of Opportunity in America, 2009, which looks at government data, government sources of data that tell the story of how we're doing in terms of opportunity, in terms of equality, mobility, economic security, across a wide range of sectors, healthcare and housing and employment and the like. And some of it is data that all of you are already familiar with, but it's supposed to be in it. The point is to put it in a narrative of opportunity and for it to be a tool for advocates and the like. So I just wanted to mention that, but particularly on the legal framework, if you all have any thoughts about how people in your neck of the woods could actually use this for some leverage to force investment in the right kinds of projects and in equitable projects, I'd love to hear. Thanks.
In San Francisco, we actually just met with the person who's managing the monies that are coming to the city from the stimulus package. And there's a lot of concerns in the various neighborhoods, not because the money's not going to be spent in those communities, but it's actually going to be spent on more physical stuff like potholes as opposed to people. And so it's going to be, instead of providing support for programs, it'll be for streets and things like that. So I think, and given that San Francisco has a $200 million budget cuts this year, people are really concerned, but the approach that I think they're taking is not one about focusing on people, but more on the physical infrastructure.
This is a purple.
Hi, I'm Vinny Owens with the New York City Office of Financial Empowerment. I have a question about a form of community equity that's a little controversial. Affordable housing is obviously very expensive to do, especially in major cities like New York City. It requires a great deal of subsidy. And as a number of cities, like Granados and San Antonio and ours, look at purchasing foreclosed properties in order to facilitate neighborhood stabilization and make it available to affordable low-income families. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the notion of trying to get our cities to commit to building a stock of permanently affordable housing by placing such housing that the city buys up into community equity vehicles like community land trusts, so that we preserve long-term and don't have to re-subsidize. Now, the controversy is, I worked on land trust development land trusts 20 years ago, that they're viewed often as second-class ownership because it doesn't give the full rights, namely the unlimited equity that other Americans are afforded, and that has been the vehicle for so much appreciation and wealth creation for many families moving into the middle class. Obviously, it gives the other essential forms of ownership, but not the unfettered fee-simple ownership, but limited equity. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are in terms of your own individual views and or how your communities might accept the notion, which has a very philosophical premise about land stewardship, but also a very practical look at recycling public subsidy long term, and also maybe other people, how they view that and how we reconcile that with what has been our most common form of wealth accumulation, home ownership, and not just owning a home, but the reality is of the appreciation in home value, which has benefited so many people, but is causing a great deal of long-term problems as we look at constantly needing to provide subsidy for affordable housing.
So, Minnie, you asked a provocative question, which we have 1 minute. You have a breath to say. But ignoring each other, you can carry on this conversation.
I put it out there for people to ponder over. I'd love to have discussion about it.
Felix, would you like to say one thing before we close?
No, I thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be around all of you guys. I see a lot of familiar faces. I haven't talked to many of you this time, but I recognize you from years past, and thank you very much.
And Trina, any last comments?
Well, thank you for your time and energy, and I think this is an amazing group, and let's keep growing it.
I too like to thank everyone. This has been a wonderful day thus far. A lot of active and engaged conversation, and hopefully we'll continue.
Brothers and sisters, continue speaking to each other as though you were.